Reviving a shattered ceasefire, Egypt has proposed a new plan to end Israel's war on Gaza. Hamas is said to be ready to release more hostages, but with Benjamin Netanyahu under growing pressure at home, would he accept the new deal? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. A new plan to renew a broken ceasefire. Egypt is proposing new terms to bring back the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. It includes the gradual release of Israeli captives and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Strip. The plan comes as Cairo faces mounting pressure, with US President Donald Trump calling on Egypt to take in displaced Palestinians from Gaza. On its side, Israel has remained defiant. It's intensified its attacks on the Strip, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warning it's only the beginning. So, will Egypt's proposal sway Netanyahu and his government? And would any renewed ceasefire deal with Hamas stand a chance of surviving? We'll get to these questions and our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Katia Lopez-Horoyan.
With Israel renewing its attacks on Gaza, Egypt is proposing a new plan to bring back the ceasefire deal. Hamas would release 5 living Israeli captives each week. In exchange, Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, end its aid blockade, and withdraw its forces from the Strip. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is counting on the plan to move forward. While leading the Arab League summit earlier this month, he unveiled a $53 billion plan to rebuild Gaza. But back then, the ceasefire deal was still in place. Now Sisi is reportedly under pressure from the U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly called on Egypt to take in displaced Palestinians or lose economic aid, a sentiment he echoed in January.
They will do it. They will do it.
What makes you say that?
They're going to do it. Okay? We do a lot for them, and they're going to do it.
Israel has resumed strikes against Gaza since it ended the ceasefire deal on March 18th. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling for the release of all captives and wants Hamas out of Gaza. The European Union agrees it's time for Hamas to go.
European Union sees the Palestinian Authority as best placed to govern Gaza. Here, Prime Minister, you can also count on the EU's support in helping the Palestinian Authority to prepare.
Netanyahu is also under pressure at home. Protesters have rallied against his push to fire top government officials, and captives' families are demanding he secure a deal to bring back their loved ones. As leaders consider ceasefire talks, displaced Palestinians can't do much more than wait.
We want this war to end as soon as possible because our children want to live, and we want to live our lives. I'm 50 years old. Everything I've built is gone.
They're hoping Egypt's plan will take hold. They say it's difficult to think about reconstruction and ceasefires while bombs are falling. Katia Lopez-Horoyan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Time for our discussion. Let's bring in our guests today. And joining us from Cairo is H.A. Hellier, Senior Fellow in Geopolitics, International Security and Middle East Studies at the Royal United Services Institute of Defence and Security think tank. In Tel Aviv, Akiva Elder, a political analyst and former columnist at Haaretz newspaper. And in Arlington, Virginia, Khalid Al-Gindi, visiting scholar at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us on Inside Story. If I can start with you, H.A., there in Cairo. We have a new Egyptian ceasefire proposal, and this is coming about a week since Israel resumed its bombardment of Gaza. Of course, Egypt, with Qatar and the US, one of the mediators. What do we know about this proposal?
So the outlines of the proposal are more along the lines of releasing hostages, stopping the bombardment. I confess the proposal itself leaves aside the final sort of issue to be resolved here, which is, what are we going to do with Gaza going forward, considering that the Israelis seem very concerned about maintaining complete security control over Gaza. And that, I think, is a circle that simply cannot be squared. If you have the recognition of Gaza as being an occupied territory and the Israelis being the occupying power, then the position in international law is that Israel has to end its occupation. This is what the International Court of Justice made very clear. So all of these bridging proposals in the meantime, I think, have to keep this in plain view. And unfortunately, what we've seen over not just the last week or the last few months, but really over the last few decades, is that unfortunately the Israelis don't feel like they have to move in the direction of ending that occupation and going towards a permanent solution. On the contrary, their idea of a solution seems to be making Gaza uninhabitable for Palestinians as much as possible and maintaining security control over the entirety of the Strip.
So, Akiva, pick up that point for us if you can. Does Prime Minister Netanyahu want a permanent solution, or does he want endless war?
Actually, what Netanyahu wants is what President Trump tells him that he wants. Netanyahu wants to perpetuate a situation. He is Mr. Status Quo. He doesn't want to rock the boat. His own boat, the coalition boat, which just a couple of hours ago, he was able to pass the annual budget, which keeps him safe, solid for another year. So on the other hand, right now, he doesn't owe much to his partners from the zealots from the radical right, like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, because he depended on them as well as the ultra-Orthodox to get through this, the annual budget by the end of this month.
So Akiva, if the budget pressure has gone away, does that mean if the US, and the US probably is the only country that could put pressure on Netanyahu, that if the US was to put pressure on Netanyahu now, then perhaps Netanyahu could move now?
Exactly, James, because right now Netanyahu doesn't have this pretext that he has to pass the budget. He had to give something to benefit to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the commitment to perpetuate the war. Actually, this is amazing. You can get back a minister to the cabinet once you promise him that there will not be any peace around, that there is no ceasefire. And actually, what it means that bringing back, as was reported yesterday in Haaretz, to bring back, as my colleague from Egypt said, that Gaza is under occupation, and it has been under occupation for many years until the unilateral withdrawal with a military government in Gaza. So there is no vacuum. Somebody has to take over the responsibility on the 2 million people who refuse to leave Gaza. Actually, they have nowhere to go.
Khalid, maybe we take a step back because, of course, we had this ceasefire, the so-called phase one of the ceasefire. Then there were the negotiations, were supposed to be the negotiations on phase two, and Israel didn't want those negotiations. The US negotiator, Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's very good friend, offered his own bridging proposal, although many thought that was actually an Israeli proposal just to keep phase one going. But the problem with that is that would mean, yes, Israel and the US get more captives released, but Hamas would never get what it wanted, which was a permanent end to the war.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think this comes down to, as we just heard from Akiva Eldar, this is about Netanyahu's personal and political survival. He needs this war to continue in order to remain in power and keep his coalition intact. We saw one coalition partner, the extremist Itamar Ben-Gvir, leave his coalition in response to the signing of the ceasefire deal in January. A second extremist coalition partner, Bezalel Smotrich, has threatened to bolt if Netanyahu moves ahead with phase 2, and that would completely collapse his coalition. So this is really, I think, about maintaining, like everything that we've seen, virtually everything that we've seen, Netanyahu's, over the last 15, 16 months, Netanyahu's decision-making is based primarily not about hostages or peace or even the long-term future of Gaza, but about remaining in power. And he's been able to do that because he had a very acquiescent U.S. president in Joe Biden, and he has a more than accommodating president in Donald Trump. I don't agree that Netanyahu is following Trump's orders. I think, to the contrary, Trump has fashioned his own policy around the demands of Netanyahu and his coalition partners, including his rather insane proposal to depopulate Gaza. This is not something that originates in Washington. This is an idea that Israeli extremists have held to for many decades and now see an opportunity to execute.
We'll come back to that whole plan of expulsion in a moment, but just staying with you, the other thing that has happened before Israel started its latest bombardment is Israel now has even more resources to bomb if it wants. It's worth noting that at the beginning of March, the US administration gave an extra $4 billion in military assistance. And if you actually look at the cumulative total since Donald Trump became the president, it's an extra $12 billion. And any restrictions, and there weren't many, that were there under the Biden administration, they've all been lifted, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's really quite remarkable that a president who has pinned his whole presidency on America first and scaling back, government expenditures and smaller government and putting U.S. priorities in order before looking after those of foreign nations. The giant gaping exception to all of that is Israel. And there is no problem cutting welfare programs and things that benefit American veterans and sick children and senior citizens, but maintaining Israel's military stockpile seems to be a priority. So there's a fundamental contradiction in Donald Trump, who has also fashioned himself as the peacemaker. He told everyone, I'm going to end the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza. And for a while, it looked like that might be the case. He signed up for the ceasefire. He pressured Netanyahu to sign on. But as of this moment, Netanyahu doesn't care. I mean, I think, Donald Trump doesn't seem to, he seems perfectly content with the carnage and destruction in Gaza, because, again, the rules of ordinary politics and common sense when it comes to Israel in Washington just don't apply.
H.A., let's drill down with you. You're in Cairo, the Egyptian position. I could ask you what Egypt wants, but I think I'm going to ask you a different question. What is it that Egypt really doesn't want?
Well, I should just make it clear. I'm only happen to be in Cairo. I'm not representing the Egyptian position.
No, I understand that.
But what Cairo's made really clear over the past almost 18 months now is that any solution to Gaza should be about a Palestinian state and should not be about the expulsion or displacement, temporary or otherwise, of Palestinians from Gaza. And keep in mind, on the Egyptian side, there's a historical memory that relates to this. The Israelis, before historically have tried to claim territory or tried to get the Egyptians to accept a cutting out of Sinai of certain, several hundred kilometers worth of territory in order to establish a Palestinian entity there. And over the past 16, 17 months now, there have been regular discussions emanating in Israel around quote unquote voluntary migration of Palestinians from Gaza into Sinai. Of course, when we say voluntary, I insist on putting quotation marks, because when you make a territory uninhabitable and then tell people you're free to go, no, that's not voluntary, that's ethnic cleansing. So Cairo has been very clear that anything along the lines of the Riviera plan that was mentioned, Donald Trump's plan about depopulating Gaza, is unacceptable. That reconstruction of Gaza can take place with Palestinians remaining in Gaza and should take place with Palestinians remaining in Gaza. Egypt has made it very clear it's not interested in being complicit in ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and a second Nakba.
And HA, I mean, as you say, you are visiting Cairo, you are not based there, but you're clearly listening to what the Egyptian government has been saying on this. Why is the idea of Palestinians being pushed across the border, which of course is illegal under international law, why is it seen as the nightmare scenario by President Sisi for his country?
Well, there's a few things here. First, when it comes to Palestinians leaving Gaza, the Israelis have made it very clear they won't be allowed back. And I think history bears this out. There has not been any episode in the past 70, 80 years where Palestinians left their homes in Mandate Palestine and were able to return, irrespective of any claims to the country that they would be allowed and so on. So there's a recognition here that if Palestinians were to leave, then it would be ethnic cleansing and it would be permanent. And it would be the precursor to the liquidation of the Palestinian cause. And Cairo's made it very clear it's not interested in that. Another issue in this regard is that if you had Palestinians move from Gaza to Sinai, one thing that Cairo's expressed, and I think Sisi said this himself in a press conference, that this could be used as a pretext by the Israelis to then strike at Egyptian territory. So I think that it's very clear that if there are any sort of mass expulsion or mass displacement event leading Palestinians to have to leave Gaza and go into Sinai, that Egypt would regard this as a very serious red line. And it wouldn't surprise me. In fact, it would surprise me if they didn't militarize Sinai immediately as a result.
Akiva, I mean, if you'd gone back a couple of years, you wouldn't have expected anyone around Prime Minister Netanyahu to have supported publicly the idea of expelling the Palestinians because of the uproar they'd have faced from the international community and the fact it was illegal under international law. Now, though, you have the Israeli Security Cabinet approving a new immigration directorate, a part of the Ministry of Defense, as I understand it, to make plans to expel Palestinians. What has changed and how much of this is down to Trump's comments enabling it?
What has changed, James, is October 7th, 23. Netanyahu is actually exploiting and taking advantage of the worst catastrophe that happened to the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And people are still traumatic. And the Hamas has become kind of an equivalent to the Nazi party. Most of the Israelis want to see the end of the war, but Netanyahu promised them the total, ultimate removal of Hamas, victory, and he cannot deliver. So what we see now is an attempt to eat the cake and have it. On one hand, to keep the relationship with Egypt, with Jordan, to keep the Abraham Accords, to satisfy Qatar as being the ultimate mediator, which the Egyptians don't like so much. There is a kind of a race who is closer to the table, the negotiating table. But yes, since October 23, people don't see any solution. The two-state solution are not part of the public discourse, James. Even the leaders of the center-right are not even mentioning this possibility. You can hardly hear this from the leader of the Labour Party, Yair Golan, who is talking about a political, diplomatic solution to the conflict. And there is not even pressure from the street. People are busy now with saving the Israeli democracy. You can see thousands of people marching in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. But what they demand is to put an end to not to the war in Gaza, to the bloodshed of both Palestinian and Israeli. The Israeli soldiers are going to be sent back to Gaza. They are trying to save the Israeli democracy. The Attorney General, the head of the Secret Service, the Shin Bet. And right now what we see is that Netanyahu passed a budget that will cost millions because he's channeling money to the settlers, to the ultra-Orthodox, and this is what is bothering the Israelis. I go to the demonstrations and I don't see any banners or people saying anything about the occupation, about 50,000 Palestinians killed. The Israelis are still buried, deeply buried in the trauma of October 7th. And Netanyahu, instead of appointing a commission to inquire this huge blunder of his, what he's doing is using this awful blunder that he led to when he became the partner of the Hamas for many years.
Khaled, I mean, the other thing, of course, we had at the beginning of February were Trump's comments, which we referred to earlier, turning the Gaza Strip into a resort. As ever, with the Trump administration, the situation is somewhat confused because last week, when he was there with the Irish Prime Minister, he said nobody's expelling any Palestinians. And yet we have credible reports that the administration has been reaching out to African governments, Sudan, Somalia, and the breakaway nation of Somaliland. I mean, do you think the Trump administration is actively pushing this idea of kicking out Palestinians and moving them elsewhere? And how much do you think Egypt currently factors into those ideas?
Yeah, I think they are actively pushing it, as you just noted. They are asking specific countries, not just in East Africa, but also others in the region, Syria and others, to take in large numbers of Palestinians. I think when he said in that moment that there won't be an expulsion of Palestinians, I think there's a bit of sleight of hand here, or kind of rhetorical sleight of hand. I think what he meant was sort of along the lines of what Israelis are saying, euphemistically, that this will be a voluntary program. And so I think it's perfectly consistent with the Israeli vision of, and as Hisham, of course, pointed out, it's not really voluntary when you've annihilated an entire society and starved the population, because let's not forget, Israel has not allowed any aid into Gaza since the beginning of this month. And that is obviously taking a toll. So if people have no hospitals and have no food, no schools, no infrastructure, of course they will leave. So I do take very
let me bring in HA again, if I can, now on the administration, HA, because Mr. Witkoff seems to be the main man dealing with this. He's also the main man dealing with the Russia-Ukraine negotiations, and we've seen those amazing comments on the commercial messaging app Signal, remarkable intelligence breach there. The same figures, Mr. Witkoff as well is involved with bombing Yemen. Do you fear that perhaps Gaza is currently at the bottom of the list, and while Gaza's at the bottom of the list, Israel gets to decide what happens?
I think you really hit the nail on the head there, James. Part of what I think has been going on when it comes to policy on Israel-Palestine is that you have an administration that is perfectly happy to allow Israel to take the lead at a time when it needs to actually use as much leverage as it can to push Israel into a particular direction with regards to the ceasefire, with regards to the occupation, with regards to prisoners, and so on and so on. And you're right, Witkoff has been, frankly, distracted into other files, particularly with regards to Russia-Ukraine, despite the fact that he's the Middle East envoy. But that tells you something, I think, about how the administration is working out. So you have the situation where Israel, I think, and it's correct to think that it has complete impunity and is quite empowered at the same time. I think a lot of people made the mistake in January of thinking that because Netanyahu was forced into the ceasefire hostage agreement, that it meant that the United States under Trump was going to be more muscular in some way with regards to the Israelis in terms of its conduct of the war. And I think that people misread that very badly. The ceasefire hostage agreement was about showing that Trump could make a deal, but it wasn't about addressing any sort of change in longstanding American policy when it comes to this particular issue. On the contrary, I think that what you've seen evidenced over the past couple of months is that Washington is giving even more of a free hand to the Israelis with regards to Gaza, but also with regards to the West Bank, which we haven't discussed. And I'm afraid that if DC continues in this vein, then it's likely to see the Israelis go much further, not simply in violence on Gaza, but annexations in both Gaza and the West Bank.
Thank you very much, H.A. Thank you to our guests today, H.A. Hillier, Akiva Elder and Khalid El-Gindi. Comprehensive coverage of the war on Gaza continues around the clock on Al Jazeera. And to put things into context, you can also find comment and analysis on our website, aljazeera.com. If you have thoughts on today's discussion, make them known by posting on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or use X. Look for @AJ Inside Story. I'll be back here very soon. Until then, from me, James Bays, and the whole team, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.